Hello everyone, and welcome back to Snowbound Screams Tonight. We travel into the forgotten backroads of America, places where light fades, and what remains are stories that refuse to die. Across these hills, rivers, and empty towns are accounts drawn from witness reports, police files, and archived broadcasts. Each one verified, recorded, and retold in their own words. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park spans over 500,000 acres across Tennessee and North Carolina. Established in 1934, it remains America's most visited national park, with more than 14 million visitors annually. Yet beyond the well-trodden paths and scenic overlooks lies a wilderness that has preserved its secrets for centuries. Rangers who patrol these ancient mountains encounter more than lost hikers and wildlife disturbances. They bear witness to phenomena that defy explanation. These 7 ranger reports represent only a fraction of the unusual encounters documented in park archives between 2015 and 2022. Names have been changed to protect privacy, but the essential facts remain as recorded in official incident reports. Now, let us begin with our first story. It was late October of 2015. Ranger Sarah Mitchell had worked in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park for 7 years, primarily patrolling the Cades Cove area. The autumn colors were at their peak that week, drawing record crowds to the historic valley. Mitchell had started her shift at dawn, completing the usual perimeter check before the tourist buses arrived. The morning air carried the first chill of the approaching season, mist rising from the cove as the sun crested the mountains. By late afternoon, most visitors had moved on to Newfound Gap or Clingman's Dome. Mitchell parked her patrol vehicle near the primitive Baptist church, one of the historic structures preserved in the cove. She needed to document some minor vandalism on the church's exterior, nothing serious, just some recent carvings in the weathered wood. As she photographed the damage, she noticed something unusual. The church door, which should have been locked, stood slightly ajar. Mitchell found this strange, as she had personally secured it the previous evening. The air inside the church was unnaturally cold despite the mild afternoon temperature outside. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light, piercing through the grimy windows. Mitchell noted that the interior showed no signs of disturbance, except for a series of small handprints on the pews, as if children had walked through, trailing their hands along the wood. What struck her as odd was the size of the prints, too small for typical children, almost doll-like in their proportions. As she continued her inspection, Mitchell heard what sounded like whispering from the back of the church. The voices were high-pitched, like those of young children, though she couldn't make out specific words. When she called out, announcing her presence as a park ranger, the whispering ceased immediately. The sudden silence felt heavier than the noise had been. Mitchell searched the building thoroughly, but found no one. The back door remained locked from the inside. Mitchell filed an incident report noting the unlocked door and handprints, but made no mention of the whispering, thinking it might have been the wind or her imagination. 2 days later, another ranger, David Chen, reported similar handprints in the nearby Missionary Baptist Church, though this time they appeared on the ceiling as well. When photographed, the prints showed an unusual pattern, no fingerprints, just smooth palm impressions with 5 distinct finger marks. The following week, Mitchell was conducting closing rounds when she saw 3 small figures near the tree line beyond the church cemetery. They appeared to be children, dressed in old-fashioned clothing that didn't match modern tourist attire. As she approached, the figures moved deeper into the woods without turning around. Mitchell estimated their height at no more than 3 feet each. When she reached the spot where they had stood, she found no footprints in the damp soil. Park archaeologists examined this handprints, and determined they didn't match any known patterns. The preservation team tried various cleaning methods on the church pews, but the faint impressions remained visible. Historical records showed no documented deaths of children in the immediate area, though Cades Cove had suffered from a diphtheria outbreak in the 1880s that had claimed several young lives. Mitchell requested a transfer to the Elkmont district the following spring. In her exit interview, she mentioned only the increased tourist traffic as her reason for leaving. She never spoke of the small figures or the whispering voices again. The handprints gradually faded over the next year, disappearing completely after the spring rains. The churches remained locked at all times thereafter, with additional security measures implemented. No official explanation was ever documented for the phenomena Mitchell experienced. The incident report remains in park archives, marked as unusual occurrences, with no follow-up investigation required. It was early March of 2016. Ranger Michael Torres had been with the National Park Service for 12 years, spending the last 5 in the backcountry division of the Great Smoky Mountains. His expertise in wilderness survival and navigation made him the go-to person for search operations in the park's most remote areas. That particular morning, Torres was leading a 3-day training exercise for newer rangers in the Hazel Creek section, a region accessible only by boat or an 11-mile hike. The weather had been unseasonably warm, with temperatures reaching the mid-60s by noon. Torres had stopped the group near the remnants of the Proctor community to discuss the history of the area when he noticed something odd about the trail markers. The distinctive metal blazes that marked the path seemed to have shifted position since his last patrol 3 weeks earlier. Torres dismissed this initially, thinking perhaps maintenance crews had rerouted sections of the trail without proper notification. As the group continued toward the campsite near Bone Valley, Torres grew increasingly concerned. The terrain didn't match his memory of the area. Features he expected to find specific rock formations, stream crossings, and even a notable waterfall were absent. When he checked his GPS, it showed them on the correct trail. Yet the landscape was unfamiliar to someone who had walked these paths dozens of times. The younger rangers noticed nothing amiss, but Torres' unease grew as afternoon approached. The forest around them seemed strangely quiet, no birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the undergrowth. Even the wind appeared to avoid their small group, leaving the leaves on surrounding trees motionless. When one of the trainees pointed out a structure in the distance, Torres realized his worst fear. They were approaching a cabin that should have been 5 miles to the northeast of their current position. Torres called for a halt, explaining to the group that they needed to backtrack. As he consulted his topographic map and GPS unit again, both devices began malfunctioning. The GPS showed them standing in the middle of Hazel Creek, while the compass needle spun erratically. The trainees watched as Torres, normally unflappable in any wilderness situation, grew visibly pale. He ordered everyone to stay together as he attempted to reorient himself using the sun's position. But the sky had grown uniformly overcast despite earlier clear conditions. What happened next was documented in 3 separate incident reports. Torres described hearing what sounded like distant church bells, though no churches existed within 15 miles of their location. The sound seemed to move around them, sometimes coming from ahead, then from behind, never settling in one direction. As the bells grew louder, Torres noticed the forest floor had changed the familiar pine needles and fallen leaves replaced by a thick, unnaturally green moss that seemed to absorb sound. The group decided to retreat the way they had come. But the trail they had followed had vanished. The trees around them appeared to have grown closer together, their branches intertwining to form a dense canopy that blocked what little light remained. Torres made the decision to call for evacuation using his satellite phone. but the device showed no signal despite its emergency capabilities. The group spent what felt like hours walking in what they hoped was the direction of the trailhead. As darkness fell, they discovered a small clearing where they decided to wait until morning. Torres noted in his report that during the night, all 5 rangers experienced the same dreamlike state in which they saw shadowy figures moving between the trees just beyond the firelight. None of the rangers could agree on what these figures looked like, only that they were tall and unnaturally thin. When morning came, the group found themselves less than a quarter-mile from the Hazel Creek trailhead, in a location Torres had passed numerous times before. The trail markers were exactly where he expected them to be, and the terrain matched his memory perfectly. The satellite phone suddenly showed full signal strength, and Torres immediately contacted park headquarters to report their situation. A subsequent investigation by Park Service officials found no explanation for the rangers' experience. The GPS units and compasses worked perfectly when tested. Weather records showed clear skies throughout the period in question. Most disturbingly, when Torres returned to the area with a search team 2 weeks later, they found no evidence of the strange moss or any disturbed vegetation where the rangers had camped. Torres never led another training exercise in the Hazel Creek area. He requested and received a transfer to the Oconaluftee district the following month, where he remained until his retirement in 2021. The other 4 rangers who experienced the incident have never spoken publicly about what happened that March day in the Smokies. The official incident report concludes with a note about possible geographic disorientation due to unusual weather conditions, though Torres's personal log entry simply states, "The trail was not there. Something else was in its place." It was August of 2017. Ranger James Harris had only been working in the Great Smoky Mountains for 6 months, transferring from Yellowstone to escape what he described as excessive supernatural tourism. His first summer assignment was managing the crowds at Andrews Bald, one of the park's most popular high-elevation destinations. The Bald, a grassy meadow atop Forney Ridge, offered panoramic views of the southern Smokies and attracted hundreds of visitors daily during peak season. The pattern began subtly. Harris noticed that on several occasions when conducting closing rounds, he would find personal items left behind, not the typical water bottles or clothing, but singular objects of a more personal nature: a child's shoe, a single photograph in a frame, a wedding ring. Each time, these items were placed deliberately at the very edge of the Bald, facing toward Klingman's Dome. Harris logged each discovery in the lost and found inventory, noting the unusual specificity of the items. By mid-August, visitors began reporting strange experiences. Multiple hikers described feeling watched while on the Bald, though no one could identify from where. Several mentioned seeing a tall figure standing at the tree line, always partially obscured by fog or trees. When approached, the figure would vanish. Harris initially dismissed these reports as collective imagination or misidentification of park personnel, until he witnessed the phenomenon himself. One evening, while securing the area, Harris saw what appeared to be an unusually tall person standing motionless at the edge of the forest where the Forney Ridge Trail meets the Bald. The figure was dressed in what looked like old-fashioned ranger attire, though the uniform style didn't match any current or historical Park Service designs. Harris called out, announcing himself as the closing ranger, but the figure didn't respond. When he began walking toward it, the figure moved backward into the forest with unnatural speed, disappearing into the growing darkness. The following week, 2 hikers reported that their compasses malfunctioned while on the Bald, with needles spinning erratically. Later that same day, another visitor approached Harris at the trailhead, visibly shaken, asking about the tall man in old clothes who had been watching her group from the tree line. When Harris went to investigate, He found no one, but discovered a series of unusually large footprints in the soft soil near the edge of the bald. The prints measured approximately 18 inches in length, with a stride that covered nearly 6 feet between steps. Park Service anthropologists were consulted about the phenomenon. They noted that Cherokee legends spoke of a tall, thin forest spirit known as Tzul'kalu, the slant-eyed or sloping giant, said to inhabit high mountain areas and occasionally interact with humans. The figure was often described as a guardian of the mountains, sometimes helpful, sometimes dangerous. Harris was familiar with these stories, but had dismissed them as folklore until his own encounters. The most disturbing incident occurred on August 29th, when a family from Ohio reported that their 7-year-old daughter had gone missing for approximately 20 minutes while they were having lunch on the bald. The child was found sitting alone near the tree line, humming an unfamiliar tune. When questioned by her parents and later by Harris, the girl said she had been talking to the tall man who lives in the trees. She described him as having eyes like the night sky and hands that were cold like stone. The child appeared unharmed, but seemed unusually calm about the experience. Harris documented the encounter in a detailed report that eventually made its way to the regional office in Atlanta. 2 senior rangers were dispatched to assist with patrols and investigation. They spent 3 days on the bald, but witnessed nothing unusual, though one of them reported feeling intensely watched during evening hours. The phenomenon seemed to cease after Labor Day, when visitor numbers dropped with the approaching autumn. Harris completed his first year at Andrews Bald without further incidents. He was reassigned to the Twin Creeks area the following summer, though he never filed an official request for transfer. When asked about his time at Andrews Bald by newer rangers, Harris would only say that some places in these mountains have memories that aren't always friendly to visitors. The Andrews Bald incident reports remain in park archives, categorized under unusual visitor experiences. No official explanation was ever documented, though a note in the file suggests possible mass hysteria enhanced by isolation and elevation. The footprints photographed by Harris were analyzed by a forensic anthropologist who concluded they were consistent with no known hominid species, current or historical. It was November of 2018. Ranger Eleanor Vance had spent most of her 20-year career in the Great Smoky Mountains working in resource management, specifically monitoring water quality in the park's numerous streams and creeks. Walker Creek, located in the Tremont area, was one of her regular testing sites due to its unique ecosystem and relative isolation from major tourist areas. The creek ran through a narrow valley where the forest canopy grew particularly dense, creating a perpetual twilight even on the brightest days. Vance's routine involved collecting water samples at 3 designated points along Walker Creek. The first 2 sites, located near the trailhead, always yielded predictable results consistent with seasonal patterns. The third site, situated approximately 3 miles upstream near an old logging camp from the 1920s, had begun showing unusual readings over the past several months. The water chemistry had changed in ways that defied explanation: higher mineral content, unusual pH fluctuations, and the presence of microorganisms not typically found in Appalachian mountain streams. On the morning of November 7th, Vance was hiking to the 3rd testing site when she noticed something disturbing about the creek itself. The water, which should have been relatively clear during the dry autumn season, had developed an unusual opalescent quality. When she collected the sample, she observed that the water appeared to shimmer and change colors when viewed from different angles, though this effect disappeared when the water was placed in the sterile collection vials. As Vance continued upstream, she became aware of a sound that seemed to emanate from the creek itself, a low, rhythmic humming. that varied in pitch but maintained a consistent cadence. The sound reminded her of the chanting she had heard during a visit to a Buddhist temple years earlier, though she couldn't identify specific words or patterns. What unsettled her most was how the sound seemed to sync with her own heartbeat, creating a disorienting resonance in her chest. The third testing site, located near a small waterfall, was where Vance experienced the most disturbing phenomenon. As she approached the area, she noticed what appeared to be stones arranged in deliberate patterns along the creek bank, circles within circles, with lines connecting them to form geometric designs that were too precise to be natural formations. When she stepped closer to examine them, the humming sound from the creek intensified, and the air grew suddenly cold despite the mild autumn temperature. What happened next was documented in Vance's official report and later corroborated by forensic analysis of her audio equipment. As she stood by the creek preparing to collect her samples, Vance distinctly heard what sounded like voices speaking in unison from within the waterfall itself. The language was unfamiliar, bearing no resemblance to Cherokee or any other Native American dialect she had encountered. The voices seemed to be calling her name, though not Eleanor, but something else that sounded like Eleonora, or perhaps Eleonara. Vance activated the audio recording function on her work phone, capturing approximately 45 seconds of the phenomenon before the device malfunctioned. When she retreated from the area, the voices ceased immediately. The water in the creek returned to its normal appearance, and the humming sound faded away. The stone patterns remained exactly as she had found them. The audio file, though corrupted in sections, was later analyzed by audio engineers at the University of Tennessee. They confirmed the presence of what appeared to be multiple voices, speaking in some unknown language, with a frequency pattern that seemed to pulse at approximately 7.83 Hz, the same frequency as the Earth's electromagnetic resonance, also known as the Schumann resonance. The engineers could not explain how natural water flow could produce such organized vocal patterns. Vance returned to Walker Creek 2 days later with 2 other rangers. The stone patterns were still there, though they appeared slightly altered from her previous visit. The water samples collected that day showed normal readings, and no unusual sounds were detected. The rangers photographed the stone arrangements before dismantling them, noting that the stones were covered with a thin, iridescent film that dissolved when exposed to direct sunlight. Subsequent visits to Walker Creek over the following months yielded normal water readings and no unusual phenomena. Vance continued her regular testing schedule, but never experienced anything similar to the events of November 7th. She documented her experience in a detailed report that was classified as unexplained environmental anomaly and filed in the park's special collections. Vance retired from the National Park Service in 2020. In her exit interview, when asked about her most memorable experience in the Smokies, she mentioned only the unusual water chemistry at Walker Creek, without elaboration. The audio file remains in park archives, accessible only to senior researchers with special clearance. The stone patterns from Walker Creek were never fully explained, though geologists who examined the photographs suggested they might be an unusual form of cryogenic soil pattern, despite the lack of freezing conditions. No further incidents have been reported at Walker Creek since Vance's experience. The creek continues to be monitored regularly as part of the park's water quality assessment program, with all readings remaining within expected parameters. It was January of 2019. Ranger Tom Bradley had worked the night shift in the Great Smoky Mountains for 3 years, primarily responsible for responding to emergencies after the visitor centers closed. The winter months were typically quiet, with only the most dedicated hikers braving the cold temperatures and occasional snow. Bradley's patrol route covered the Cades Cove Loop Road and several popular trails that remained accessible during winter months. The pattern began in early January, when Bradley received reports of a lone hiker seen on various trails after dark. What made these reports unusual was that the hiker appeared to be wearing summer clothing, light hiking pants, and a short-sleeved shirt despite temperatures dropping into the 20s at night. Multiple visitors who had stayed at the Cades Cove campground reported seeing this figure walking purposefully along trails without any apparent gear or illumination. On January 12th, Bradley encountered the figure himself while patrolling the Rich Mountain Loop Trail near dusk. He described a man approximately 6 feet tall, wearing what appeared to be modern hiking clothes, but no jacket or cold weather gear. The man moved with an unusual gait, too smooth for the uneven terrain, almost as if floating rather than walking. When Bradley called out to check on the hiker's welfare, the figure turned briefly, revealing a face that Bradley described as strangely featureless, like a photograph that had lost all detail. The figure then continued down the trail without responding. Bradley followed at a distance, noting that the hiker left no footprints in the damp soil despite the recent rainfall. When Bradley radioed dispatch to report the encounter, he experienced significant static interference, unusual for the area where radio communication was typically reliable. By the time he reached the trailhead, the mysterious hiker had vanished. Over the next 2 weeks, Bradley received multiple reports from visitors about the midnight hiker. Witnesses consistently described the same figure, a man in summer clothes who moved silently through the forest and left no footprints. Some mentioned that the figure seemed to phase in and out of visibility, becoming transparent at times before solidifying again. Most disturbingly, several witnesses reported that the hiker appeared to be looking for something, often stopping to examine specific trees or rocks before moving on. Bradley began researching park records for similar phenomena and discovered a series of reports from the 1970s describing a similar figure. These reports had been filed by Ranger William Henderson, who had documented encounters with what he called the transparent man over a 6-month period before transferring to another park. The descriptions matched almost exactly: summer clothes in winter, no footprints, featureless face, and the apparent search for something unknown. The most significant incident occurred on January 28th, when a family from Georgia reported that their 10-year-old son had gone missing for approximately 30 minutes near the Abrams Falls trailhead. When the boy was found, he was sitting on a log talking to himself. When questioned by his parents and later by Bradley, the boy said he had been helping the man in the thin clothes find his way home. The child described the man as nice but sad, and mentioned that he was looking for the place where the river goes backward. The boy appeared unharmed, but seemed unusually distant for the remainder of their visit. Bradley documented this encounter in a detailed report that caught the attention of park management. 2 additional rangers were assigned to assist with night patrols in the Cades Cove area. For the next week, they conducted systematic searches of the trails where the figure had been spotted, finding no evidence of any unauthorized camping or unusual activity. On February 5th, Bradley encountered the figure again near the John Oliver cabin. This time, Bradley observed the phenomenon more closely. The hiker seemed to flicker between visibility and transparency, almost like a poorly tuned television image. When Bradley approached cautiously, the figure turned and spoke for the first time. The voice, Bradley reported, sounded distant and echoey, as if coming from a great distance. "I can't find the way back," the figure said before dissolving completely and disappearing. Bradley requested and received a temporary reassignment to the Oconaluftee district the following week. The midnight hiker report ceased after mid-February, though similar sightings were documented again in the winter of 2021 by different rangers. The official explanation recorded in park files attributes the sightings to unusual atmospheric conditions combined with visitor fatigue and suggestion. Though Bradley's personal log entry states simply, "What I saw was real. It was lost, and it was looking for something I couldn't help it find." The child who spoke with the figure was later contacted by Park Service psychologists for a follow-up interview. He maintained his story consistently, adding that the man had no shadow, even when standing in direct light. The boy's parents reported that for several months after the encounter, their son would occasionally stare into empty spaces and say, "I hope the man finds his way home." No further explanation for the midnight hiker phenomenon has been documented in park records. The case remains classified as an unexplained recurring phenomenon, with no active investigation. It was September of 2019. Ranger Maria Gonzalez had been assigned to the Chimney Tops area following the major wildfires of 2016 that had devastated the region. Her role involved monitoring ecosystem recovery and ensuring visitors' safety in the reburned areas. The Chimney Tops Trail, one of the park's most popular, had been partially reopened with new safety measures after extensive rehabilitation of the burned landscape. Gonzalez noticed the phenomenon first in photographs she was taking to document vegetation recovery. When reviewing the images on her computer, she consistently captured what appeared to be a humanoid shadow in the background, despite no person being present when she took the pictures. The shadow appeared elongated and distorted, stretching across the burned ground in ways that didn't correspond to any natural light source or terrain feature. At first, Gonzalez dismissed this as a camera glitch or lens flare. But as the phenomenon continued in subsequent photographs, taken at different times of day and with different cameras, she grew concerned. The shadow always appeared in the same general area, a section of the trail particularly affected by the fire, where several hikers had lost their lives during the 2016 evacuation. By mid-September, visitors began reporting similar sightings. Several hikers described seeing a dark figure moving through the burned trees, sometimes appearing to kneel as if examining something on the ground. When approached, the figure would vanish. One group reported that the figure appeared to be calling out names, though the sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Gonzalez documented these reports in her weekly updates to park management, noting the consistency of the descriptions despite different witnesses who didn't know each other. She began carrying additional equipment on her patrols: audio recorders, EMF meters, and thermal cameras, hoping to capture some evidence of what people were experiencing. The breakthrough came on September 22nd, when Gonzalez was conducting a late afternoon patrol of the Chimney Tops Trail. As she approached the area where most sightings occurred, her thermal camera suddenly registered a significant cold spot approximately 20 degrees cooler than the surrounding air in the shape of a human figure. The cold spot remained stationary for approximately 3 minutes before moving rapidly up the burned slope, disappearing near the rock formation that gave the trail its name. What happened next was thoroughly documented in Gonzalez's official report and corroborated by the audio recording she had running continuously. As she stood near the cold spot, Gonzalez distinctly heard what sounded like multiple voices whispering faintly. Though the words were indistinct, she noted that one voice seemed to be saying, "I'm sorry," repeatedly, while another appeared to be calling the name David. The recording captured these voices clearly, though audio analysts later noted that they seemed to emanate from multiple directions simultaneously. Gonzalez called for backup using her radio, experiencing significant interference similar to what other rangers had reported in unusual encounters. When 2 additional rangers arrived 15 minutes later, they found no evidence of the cold spot or voices. However, they did discover something unusual in the area where the phenomenon had occurred: a series of small stone cairns arranged in a semicircle, each no more than 6 inches high. These formations had not been present during Gonzalez's patrol the previous day. The rangers photographed the cairns before dismantling them, noting that the stones were cool to the touch despite the warm afternoon temperature. When analyzed later, the stones showed no unusual properties or mineral content. The most puzzling aspect was that similar cairns began appearing in the same area over subsequent nights, despite no evidence of anyone building them. Gonzalez researched the history of the Chimney Tops area and discovered that among the victims of the 2016 fire was a park volunteer named David Miller, who had been helping with evacuations. Miller had reportedly returned to the area multiple times against orders, searching for a family he had helped evacuate earlier, but who had become separated from the main group. Miller's body was found near the Chimney Tops formation, where he had apparently succumbed to smoke inhalation while still searching. The voices Gonzalez had recorded were analyzed by audio experts who confirmed they appeared to be saying, "I'm sorry," and "David," among other indistinct words. The experts could not explain the origin of the recordings or how they were produced in an outdoor environment with no apparent sound sources. Gonzalez continued her patrols of the Chimney Tops area through the fall of 2019. The shadow phenomenon continued to appear in her photographs, though less frequently as winter approached. The stone cairns stopped appearing after the first snowfall in November. No visitors reported seeing the dark figure after October, though some mentioned feeling watched or experiencing sudden cold spots in the area where the sightings had occurred. The official incident report filed by Gonzalez and corroborated by the other rangers was classified as unexplained recurring phenomenon with possible connection to traumatic events. The audio recordings and photographs were archived in the park's special collections, accessible only to senior researchers. Gonzalez was reassigned to the Deep Creek area in spring 2020, though she stated in her transfer request that she wanted to experience a different ecosystem recovery, rather than specifically avoiding chimney tops. No further incidents have been reported at Chimney Tops since 2019. The trail remains open with modified access routes and enhanced safety measures. Park Service psychologists who reviewed the case suggested that the phenomena might represent collective environmental memory of the traumatic events during the 2016 fire, though no definitive explanation was ever documented in official records. It was July of 2020, a month that would mark Ranger Daniel Park's life with an inexplicable mystery that would haunt him for years to come. Park had been assigned to the Elkmont Historic District for only 2 months when he first noticed the unusual light phenomenon that would eventually become one of the most thoroughly documented, unexplained occurrences in the history of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Elkmont, nestled in the Tennessee section of the park, carried a rich and layered history that few visitors fully appreciated. Once a thriving logging community established in the early 1900s by the Little River Lumber Company, it had later transformed into an exclusive vacation retreat for wealthy families from Knoxville and other southeastern cities. Now, it stood as a ghost town of deteriorating cabins and buildings being gradually reclaimed by the forest. A place where nature and human history intertwined in a delicate balance. Park's responsibilities included monitoring the structural integrity of these historic buildings and ensuring visitors respected the restricted areas, a routine assignment that would soon become anything but ordinary. The phenomenon began subtly on a warm Tuesday evening during Park's regular patrol of the district. The sun had just dipped below the mountain ridges, casting long shadows across the clearing where the remaining structures stood. As Park made his way toward the Spence cabin, one of the best perved structures in the district, he noticed what appeared to be a faint, pulsing light emanating from the interior. The light was unusual in its quality, neither warm nor cool, but somehow both simultaneously, shifting between colors that didn't correspond to any known lighting source. It moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm, as if breathing in and out. When Park investigated, he found the cabin empty and dark, with no electrical power connected to the building. He checked the circuit breakers and examined the wiring, finding nothing that could explain what he had witnessed. Park noted the observation in his daily log, attributing it initially to a trick of the fading light, or perhaps a reflection from something in the forest. Over the next week, the phenomenon expanded to other structures in Elkmont. Park documented lights appearing in the Appalachian Clubhouse, the Levi Trentham Cabin, and several other buildings. The lights always appeared after sunset, typically beginning around 8:30 p.m. during that July period, and lasted for approximately 2 to 3 hours before fading gradually. What puzzled Park most was that the lights seemed to move between buildings in patterns that suggested deliberate behavior rather than random occurrence. One evening, he observed a light moving from the Spence cabin to the Appalachian Clubhouse, disappearing from the first structure before appearing in the second within a matter of minutes. The journey between the buildings would have taken a person several minutes to walk, yet the transition seemed instantaneous. Park, who had studied environmental science at the University of Tennessee with a focus on forest ecology, approached the phenomenon with scientific curiosity, tempered by professional skepticism. He began keeping detailed logs of the phenomenon, noting the time, duration, and characteristics of each light appearance. He also started setting up motion-activated cameras in an attempt to capture evidence of what was happening. The cameras consistently recorded the lights, but never revealed any source or cause for the phenomena. The images showed orbs of light that varied in color, from pale blue to soft yellow, sometimes appearing to pulse or flicker in patterns that seemed almost rhythmic. By late July, visitors to Elkmont began reporting similar sightings. Several families staying at the Elkmont campground described seeing dancing lights moving between the historic buildings after dark. Some mentioned that the lights seemed to respond when people spoke or made noise near the buildings, growing brighter or changing color in response to sound. One family reported that their young daughter had begun singing to the lights, which seemed to dance more energetically in response to her voice. Park documented these reports, noting the consistency of the descriptions despite different witnesses who didn't know each other. The most dramatic incident occurred on July 28th, when a group of amateur ghost hunters, who had obtained a special use permit to photograph the historic district at night, captured what appeared to be a full-body apparition near the Appalachian Clubhouse. The group, known as the Tennessee Paranormal Society, had visited Elkmont several times before without incident. On this particular evening, they had set up multiple cameras around the clubhouse, hoping to capture evidence of the light phenomenon they had heard about from other visitors. The figure, which appeared in multiple photographs taken from different angles, was described as translucent and vaguely human-shaped, with no distinct features. In one particularly striking image, the figure appeared to be standing on the porch of the clubhouse, looking out toward the forest. In another, taken just moments later from a different position, the figure seemed to be moving down the steps. The group reported that the figure seemed to be observing them from a distance, before dissolving into the light phenomenon they had been documenting. They described the experience as both terrifying and mesmerizing, noting that the air grew unusually cold when the figure appeared, despite the warm summer evening. Park was called to investigate and found the group visibly shaken. When he examined their photographs, he was surprised to see that the images matched what he had been observing for weeks, a light phenomenon that seemed to exhibit intelligent behavior. The group shared their audio recordings with Park, which captured what sounded like faint music, specifically what appeared to be an old waltz emanating from the direction of the clubhouse. The recording quality was poor, with significant background noise from insects and wind, but the melody was discernible, particularly when enhanced with audio filtering software. Park submitted a comprehensive report to park management, including the photographs and audio recordings provided by the ghost hunters. 2 senior rangers, Sarah Mitchell and James Harris, were assigned to assist with observation and documentation. Both were experienced rangers with over 20 years of service each, and both approached the assignment with the same professional skepticism that had characterized Park's initial response to the phenomenon. Over the next week, they confirmed Park's findings, witnessing the light phenomenon firsthand and documenting its unusual characteristics. On their first evening together, all three rangers observed lights appearing simultaneously in three different buildings: the Spence cabin, the Appalachian clubhouse, and the Levi Trentham cabin. The lights pulsed in what appeared to be a coordinated pattern, as if communicating with each other. Mitchell, who had a background in physics, noted that the lights seemed to defy conventional explanations, as they didn't produce heat or leave any residual evidence of their presence. What made the Elkmont phenomenon particularly compelling was its apparent connection to historical events. Research into Elkmont's past revealed that the Appalachian Clubhouse had been the site of numerous dances and social gatherings during the 1920s and 1930s, when the area served as a vacation retreat for wealthy families from Knoxville and other cities. Several former residents had reported seeing lights and hearing music in the area years after the buildings were abandoned. One former resident, interviewed in 1995 when she was in her 80s, recalled summer evenings when the ballroom would fill with light and music, even though no one had been there for years. The investigation took an unexpected turn on August 5th, when Park discovered a series of journals in the basement of the Levi Trentham cabin during a routine structural inspection. The journals, written by a woman named Margaret Henderson, who had vacationed in Elkmont during the 1930s, described her experiences with what she called the mountain lights, phenomena she attributed to the spirits of the Cherokee who had originally inhabited the area. Henderson wrote that the lights were most active during the summer months and seemed to respond to human presence, particularly music and laughter. The journals, bound in leather and remarkably well preserved despite the damp environment of the basement, spanned the years 1932 to 1938. Henderson, who appeared to be an observant and thoughtful writer, documented her experiences with meticulous detail. In one entry from July 4, 1934, she wrote, "The lights came again tonight, dancing between the cabins as if celebrating with us. William played the fiddle on the porch, and the lights seemed to sway in time with the music. Mary Sue said they were fairies, but I think they are something older, something that belonged to this place long before we built our cabins." The journals also contained drawings that closely resembled the light patterns Park had been documenting. Most intriguingly, Henderson mentioned a specific melody that, when played or sung, seemed to attract the lights. The melody was transcribed in the journals using a simple musical notation system, accompanied by the notation, "The Mountain Melody, as taught to me by Old John, the Cherokee caretaker who said his people had known it for generations." Park, who had played piano in college, transcribed the melody and recorded himself playing it on a portable keyboard during his next evening patrol. The results were documented in his official report and corroborated by the other rangers present. Within minutes of the music beginning, the light phenomenon intensified dramatically, appearing in multiple buildings simultaneously and forming patterns that seemed to dance in time with the melody. The lights grew brighter and more colorful, shifting between blue, yellow, and soft green in patterns that corresponded to the rhythm of the music. The experiment was repeated 3 times with similar results each time. The Elkmont light phenomenon continued through the summer of 2020, gradually diminishing as fall approached. Park documented the final appearance on September 15th, when a single light appeared in the Spence cabin and pulsed slowly for approximately 10 minutes before fading completely. No further incidents were reported during the remainder of Park's assignment to Elkmont. The official incident report was classified as unexplained recurring phenomenon with possible connection to historical events and environmental factors. The journals discovered by Park were archived in the park's historical collection, and the audio recordings of the melody were preserved for future research. Park was reassigned to the Sugarlands Visitor Center in November 2020, where he remained until his retirement in 2022. No definitive explanation for the Elkmont light phenomenon was ever documented in official records. Various theories were proposed and investigated, including ball lightning, seismic activity causing atmospheric electrical disturbances, and even bioluminescent fungi, but none adequately explained all aspects of the phenomenon. The case remains one of the most thoroughly investigated unusual occurrences in the history of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. With extensive photographic, audio, and documentary evidence that continues to defy conventional explanation. Park, now retired and living in Knoxville, occasionally returns to Elkmont as a visitor. He never sees the lights anymore, but he sometimes feels their presence in the quiet evenings when the mist settles between the deteriorating cabins. "I don't know what they were," he said in a 2023 interview, "but I know they were real. They were part of that place, part of its history. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only experienced." The American landscape remains vast and unknowable. From the mist-shrouded peaks of the Appalachians to the sun-scorched deserts of the Southwest, our national parks preserve not only natural wonders, but also mysteries that defy explanation. The 7 ranger reports we've explored tonight represent only a fraction of the unusual encounters documented in the archives of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. What connects these disparate phenomena? Perhaps nothing more than the human tendency to seek patterns in the unexplained. Or perhaps they point to something deeper, a recognition that our understanding of the natural world remains incomplete, that wilderness still holds secrets beyond our comprehension. The rangers who witnessed these events approached them with the same professionalism they brought to every aspect of their work. They documented what they observed, filed detailed reports, and continued their duties despite experiences that challenged their understanding of reality. Their commitment to factual observation, rather than sensational interpretation, provides us with these rare glimpses into the unexplained. In the end, these stories resist easy categorization. They exist in the space between scientific documentation and folklore, between empirical evidence and human experience. They remind us that even in our most thoroughly mapped and studied wilderness areas, mysteries endure. The Great Smoky Mountains have preserved their secrets for millions of years, long before humans arrived to name their peaks and chart their trails. They will likely continue to preserve these mysteries long after we are gone, maintaining their silence about what truly occurs in the mist-shrouded valleys and shadowed forests when no one is watching. These 7 ranger reports join countless others in the archives of our national parks' testimonies to the strange and unexplained that remind us of how much we still don't understand about the world around us. They challenge our assumptions about what is possible and invite us to consider alternative explanations for phenomena that defy conventional understanding. Perhaps the most appropriate response to such mysteries is not to seek definitive explanations, but to maintain a sense of wonder and humility in the face of what we cannot explain. The rangers who documented these experiences did so with precision and care, leaving us with detailed records that invite further investigation rather than offering easy answers. If you or someone you know has a true story to share, leave it in the comments below. Our understanding of these phenomena grows with each documented experience, each carefully observed detail, each willingness to acknowledge what we cannot explain. The wilderness continues to hold its secrets, and those who patrol its boundaries continue to document what they witness, maintaining the careful balance between scientific observation and open-minded curiosity that allows us to glimpse the mysteries that surround us. Thank you for watching Snowbound Screams. Until next time, stay safe out there.